all looking the same way. So in true anatomical position, my wrist sees sagittal plane rotation. One is going to get my wrist more into fetal, and the other is going to get my wrist out of fetal. In anatomical position of the wrist, I can move in two different directions. It's not like the knee where it's at the end of the throat. I can move in a direction of flexion or be flexed. I can move in a direction of extension or be extended from anatomical, right? I can have flexion to anatomical, and I can have flexion from anatomical. I can have extension to anatomical. I can have extension from anatomical. Again, why is that important? Goniometry stuff, right? You're going to have to do angles. And when you're measuring someone's range of motion, typically you do it from anatomical position. How far did you go back from here? How far did you go forward from there? And you can add those two and get a full, overall range of motion. But it's important to reference things to and from. Okay? Now, in addition to sagittal plane stuff, we get some frontal plane motion. And I put a picture of myself. This was about a couple years ago. There was this new training program called Delta Fit, and I tried it for a little while, and it's pretty cool. It might be touched up a little bit, right? For a couple of my blemishes, but the point is that having frontal plane motion of our wrist help extensively with a concept that I'm going to introduce to you today called your functional circle of grip. It's not a scientific term. You're not going to find it in any textbook. It's just a concept. It just means that for us to be able to do what we do as humans, gripping, tasking, articulating with our fingers is of importance. And we need to be able to put our fingers in infinitely many positions in the X, Y, Z to be able to grab things, do things, hold on to things, catch things, throw things. And one of the ways our wrists contribute is by moving in the frontal plane. So for this one, for example, as I raise the bar up, if my wrist wasn't able to move in its frontal plane, I'd have a problem here because I'm not going to snap the bar in two. By being able to move my wrist in the frontal plane, I'm able to keep my fingers under the bar. If I wasn't able to move like this, I'd be kind of stuck, or I wouldn't have as many options. When you're grabbing things and holding on to things, having the wrist be able to kind of shift and move in the frontal plane helps you to maintain grip on things. There's other reasons too. If you're hitting a hammer, the wrist kind of helps give a last little whip, like the tip of a towel. There's some other functions too. But the main thing is that when we're working and moving, having that wrist, imagine, heaven forbid, you're walking with a full glass of beer, right? Root beer or butter beer, whatever kind of beer you drink. And being able to shift and give to keep what's in your hand level, right? Your body may move, you may be going downstairs, but being able to have deviations in your wrist has a lot of practical importance. Okay? So the two main planes of motion in our wrist, we need to account for sagittal and we need to account for frontal. Got to call them something. Remember, every plane of motion is going to have two different ways of spin, clockwise, counterclockwise. So that's how we get the flexion, extension, in the fetal, out of fetal. And then the frontal planes, we call those deviations. Here's the easiest, here's a technique that you can learn from. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. Knowing that the wrist doesn't twist gives us empowerment to know that our pinky, right, will always and forever be on the side. It can't not be. Unless you dislocate something or if you have a really bad day. The pinky will always be splinted to the ulna, and that's because the wrist doesn't twist. If the wrist was able to rotate, then I could flip my thumb to my ulna side, flip my pinky to my radial side. But because the wrist doesn't spin in its transverse plane, the pinky will always be splinted to the ulnar side. So what does that mean about your thumb and the radius? They will also be splinted to each other's side. the thumb will always be radial side. And the pinky, forever and ever, in normal functioning people, will be ulnar side. So, two ways to look at these deviations. One is, if your fingers deviate pinky side, that's to the ulnar deviation. And if your fingers deviate to the radial side, that's radial deviation. Ulnar deviation, radial deviation. Okay. It's possible that when they were naming these things, they took into account, why didn't they just say avid adduction? Well, when you're avid adducting, it's kind of like one bone. Well, here are the radius and the ulnar two bones, the chicken wing bone, right? So you kind of have deviation to one of the long bones or deviation to the other long bones. Probably why they took that into consideration. Right? Does that make sense? Another way you can look at it is your middle finger. Your middle finger is kind of like a plumb bob, right? Your middle finger is Switzerland. We got two on the medial side, two on the lateral side. The middle finger kind of stays in the middle. So if you're kind of confusing about pinky side, thumb side in terms of all the fingers, just go with the middle finger. If the middle finger deviates towards the ulnar deviation. Middle finger deviates towards the radius, radial deviation. It looks like it's moving. And it is. It looks like it's not moving, and it's not. It looks like it's not moving, but it is. It looks like it's moving, but it's not. Let's see, maybe if I did something like this, or this, right, where you see the whole joint move, but that doesn't necessarily mean a head wrist motion. So, for the wrist, I'm foreshadowing only because it's very important. Because the radial ulnar joint, which I'm going to lecture on when we get back from break, can reposition the hand. And basically what's happening is the radius is wrapping and unwrapping itself. Y'all heard of the position of prone and supine, right? Prone position and supine position. That's how this gets its name. It has nothing to do with a darn soup bowl. I don't like that. And that's going to get you into trouble. I'm going to show you when we go over our head. You know what it really means? When you're in anatomical position, the radius is supine. And when it wraps itself over the ulna, it goes prone. It goes face down. And when it unwraps, it comes back to being supine. Pronation, the act of going prone. Supination, the act of going supine. But the point is that pronation and supination repositions the hand for a functional circle of grip. You want to be able to grip in a 360 degree of motion. But that doesn't change the position of the wrist joint. What I mean by that is a lot of students will get ulnar and radial deviation confused on the test because they want to bring it to global references. In anatomical position, it just so happens that my ulnar deviations occurs medially. But if I wrap my radius around the ulna, my ulnar deviation goes lateral for global reference. But from my wrist perspective, it's still the exact same thing. So that's going to be where we're going to have to work on. Ulnar deviation can look like this. Ulnar deviation can look like that. Or ulnar deviation can look like this. Ulnar, radial. Ulnar, radial. Thumb side, pinky side. Thumb side, pinky side. So it's not a globally referenced thing, and that's why I don't say it. It's not that I don't like it. It can get you in trouble if you say, oh, this motion is when that goes there. You know what I'm saying? When you use these global concepts, sometimes it works, but local concepts always work. Okay. Right wrist flexion, right wrist extension, right wrist ulnar deviation, right wrist radial deviation. Left extension, flexion, ulnar, radial,